let's get the perspective from Super Agent Scott Boras, joining us right now, representing Max. Released a statement yesterday, and we were like, we need to get into this a lot more. Scott, great to see you. You got Brzezinski and Holt and Kratz here, and we're excited to dive into this because it's a real problem, and it's why we spoke to Max about it the other day. How you doing today, and what are your thoughts, especially the day later now from what everything's going down with the league?
First of all, this group's looking in a lot better shape than me. I don't know.
You look good,
doubt,
Scott.
No, the essence of this is that when you set up systems and rules and do things that create standards instead of rules. What do I mean by that? Is that if you're driving on the freeway and the rule is drive safely, that means that how you're driving is subject to subjective interpretation by the governing body. If the rule is drive 55, then you have standards and you have notice to the driver about your exact conduct that you're to carry out. Max yesterday gets a warning, pursuant to the rules of, there's this rule in Major League Baseball, it's called 602C, which says that the umpires are to warn them and that you basically give the player an opportunity. And ironically, MLB officials are in the tunnel of the dugout area. They observed Max cleaning his hands with alcohol and astringent designed to take any substance off. Then he applies rosin and sweat for the rosin to adhere, and then he goes out. Now, the testimony of the umpires, what I call the koozie spectrometer, is that you have men that are suggesting that after this conduct being witnessed by an MLB official, they're suggesting that the tackiness that they observed originally in the prior inning had now, by touch, increased or advanced beyond what the tackiness was from the prior inning. So the assumption is now that the standard is no tacky, tacky, and tacky. And we have now heard that tacky is not, by their touch, is not something that is now acceptable. My point to you is, what and how does the manager, coaches, players, and frankly, this burden should not be on umpires, because how do you know? What is the variable? What's the standard? And then we take a historic major league player who is obviously gifted, throwing 95, 96, everything who Max Scherzer is, brilliant, has been given a warning, cleans his hands in front of an MLB official, and then the observation, the subjective observation, is that it's stickier than it was before. Or, quote, after they spoke, I'm sure, to the commissioner's office, the umpires then report after the game, it's the stickiest I've ever seen. So everything, every aspect of this testimony is subjective. Every aspect of this is illogical, because obviously when you warn a player and he goes out and cleanses his hands, that the suggestion that it's stickier, well, what's it sticky with? It's sticky with an approved substance. But the answer is, when the approved substance is not approved, is in the subjective intent and observation of the touch test by a couple umpires. And when you do this in a system, you have basically damaged the game. You prevented fans from seeing a great player. You prevented his team and ownership from depriving the skills of that player. And basically, you provided a system that is in effect. There is no way that a player can judge or have notice of how he is to apply rosin, which is by rule an accepted substance offered to the players by the league.
Well, Scott, first, thank you for coming on with us. This is an important subject for me and for many people out there that love baseball. What's next for Major League Baseball? What's next for Max? I know there's an automatic 10-game suspension. There's an appeal process, correct? And why have we not heard from the MLB official that watched him wash his hands, put rosin on his hands, and then go right to the mound? Where's that person? And why have we not heard from Phil Cuzzy? Why doesn't he have to answer questions?
Well, I assume he's somewhere in Milwaukee. His name is Brian Anderson, so we have a couple of them there. I don't know, but I, I think the aspect of this is one where the logic of this, as you pointed out earlier, AJ, is that a player would not go out, cleanse his hands, and we know that he did it because an MLB official observed it. He would not go out and make his hands stickier or tackier, as they say. But that's their allegation, that after cleansing his hands and putting the rosin on and applying the sweat to make it moist and adhere, he went out, and by their judgment, it was tackier than before. And my point about all this, if they want a level of tackiness that is acceptable or not acceptable, the players, trainers, the coaches, everyone around needs to know what that standard is. But the standard they're applying is so subjective that there is no way to have notice. So it's left clearly in the hands of the only umpire in baseball that finds this standard to be objectable to him.
Who is to blame ultimately in this whole thing? I mean, you can cut it up into portions. You can give it all 100% blame to one person. Who is to blame here, and how can we fix that?
You have to have rules. You have to have specificity. First of all, we do not want players, umpires. We do not want the rules of our game adjudicated in open public in front of 50,000 fans. We want it done privately. So there should be they have an Apple genius at the stores. We need an MLB genius at every game. And we need him there to do what? To adjudicate these things privately and say, your hands are acceptable. You can go out. We're going to look at your hands. We're going to do this independent of the umpires. We're going to do this privately. When you go out, if you want to check them, it's done in the tunnel of the dugout. There's a procedure before the pitcher goes out, and they do that. And if they want to check them afterwards, they do so in that tunnel. And you can have a spectrometer. You can have all kinds of testing devices there that determine what substances are on a player's hand. And we can have all kind of scientific methodologies to determine what that substance is and what would look, in a spectrometer. So these things can all be set up and done, but we don't want to do it in front of fans, and we certainly don't want to damage the image of players, and we don't want to in any way affect the momentum of the game. And we also don't want to put umpires in this position because it's obviously something that is so difficult for them to apply that, frankly, only one umpire has ever applied that judgment.
Yeah, Scott. Well, the lawyer's really coming out in you right now, and as a jury, I find Max not guilty of the sticky substance. I'm Team Max. Obviously, played with him. Know how he is as a competitor. Do you think the Domingo Germán incident had anything to do with this? As far as like when they had the conversation, he went back into the dugout, he came back out. They let him pitch. Kind of a big deal around that. Max, kind of the same situation, but I'm with you. I mean, it's so subjective. Like, there's got to be a better way than to just touch somebody's hands to see if, like you said, if it's not tacky, or in your words, tacky.
Yeah, I think we all, the frustration that a player feels obviously is, what am I doing? You saw me apply. The only substance on my hands is approved. Now you're saying I'm applying it at a level that is unapproved. How would I know that level? And the answer to this is that in our rules and in what we do, we have to have specificity if we're going to engage in a rule. We cannot have subjectivity. We cannot have the feel test. And the other thing, you say Max has an appeal. Well, let me tell you about that appeal. That is a commissioner's office official who will adjudicate and rule on that field. And they'll take the umpire's reports and they'll say, sorry, tacky is not tacky. So tacky violates the rule. So you get suspended because you're tacky instead of tacky. And we have no idea what the difference between tacky and tacky is.
Do you feel like the tacky and the tacky was an attack on Max? Do you feel like because he is not afraid to say things because of what he represents as an incredible player's player, that do you feel like it was this might be a 50-50 thing? We're going to attack Max on this.
You know, you never want to imply or discuss things. You know, well, it's kind of like the classic thing: did the pitcher throw at the hitter? Well, only when AJ was catching. But the
Hey.
but you know, the thing of it is, my point is, AJ umpires could think, well, AJ's catching, so you know what, he's going to throw at the hitters, but the reality, I don't ever want to imply intent. I don't want to do that. I don't want to infer something I don't have knowledge of. I just really want to make the point that if MLB goes to the level of having officials in the private areas of the dugout and they observe players cleansing their hands, and you know that is kind of that is the clarity that Max brought to this process. There's nothing on my hands here. I'm cleaning it with an astringent to remove anything you suggest is on there. Now you're going to watch me put the rosin and the sweat on and go out. The result of that is that, you know, I'm Catholic, so I've gone to confession. I've been there. And the result of it is that he goes out to the mound and they say that he is in a worse state. And then the allegations that come from that go, well, I don't know what's on his hands because it appeared to me to be something that's more than rosin. Really? Well, where does that testimony come from, and what's the basis for it? And the reality of it is that we're dealing with a witness from a neutral witness that watched him cleanse his hands and only apply the substances that are given to him by the league. So then my suggestion is, did the league give him a rosin bag that has something different than rosin? I mean, we all can apply a vast level of conduct has potentials that are not demonstrated by evidence. But the fact is, the evidence is he cleaned his hands, he went out, and after doing so and applying the product that they know was the product given to the player by the league, that product produced, in the umpire's interpretation, a substance that was tacky versus tacky.
Well, we got a new nickname for Max. He's the chemist now because he can make alcohol and rosin like Spider Tech. So he's got a job after he's done.
I guess so.
So, and by the way, Scott, only your clients threw at me, like Derek Lowe, Matt McClendon, who works for you. Those guys, they were the ones that they threw at me. I didn't tell them to throw at anybody else. Okay.
I'm not going to deny that.
What's next? What's next? I know he has an appeal. Did you call, as soon as you saw this, did you call Manfred? Do you call Raul Ibanez? Do you call somebody in the league office and say, this is bullshit? What do we do? And then now what? What's the appeal process? I don't know.
In these processes, the MLBPA are the sanctioned body that provides the representation of Max in a hearing over rule violation and such, and certainly the attorneys there do a great job of supporting the players and representing them, and obviously we contact them and give them our opinions of what's occurred, make sure that Max's testimony is chronicled and such. But remember, this is not a neutral judge. This is somebody that's going to, the umpires are employed by the league. The person adjudicating this case is employed by the league. And so normally in these dynamics is that it is not someone who is going to look at the rules and say the rules are so subjective that it's not This is not an expert when they touch a hand and say from one inning to the next that it's tacky or tackier, or it's the most tacky I've ever felt. Those dynamics and standards are not chronicled. It's not 0.3 centimeters. It's not. There's no definition to any of this. It's just really a subjective manifestation of what that day that umpire chooses to adhere to. And the only interesting about this is that the other umpires have stayed away from these subjective dynamics unless they have a noticeable substance. When you go back and look at Herman's case, now the umpire said to him, "Excuse me, you can't apply the rosin until you get out to the mound."
Well, it sounds like
now there is no rule that says when or if you can apply the rosin, because now we have a time constraint where you're running out to the mound and you're going out and you got to put the correct amount of rosin on, get that done, and then you have to do your warm-up pitches, and you have to do that within a time frame. So we have all those things that are interfacing with the rule, in addition to what now we have an interpretive application that's not written. So again, the players have no notice of when and how to apply the rosin.
well, it sounds to me like you're screwed. So good luck against the league. Maybe instead of the MLBPA, they could hire you to go in there and give Max his case.
Believe me, the arguments I'm making are things that the MLBP lawyers are fully aware of, and they have great experience in going through these things. The only problem that we have is that, these types of hearings are solely in the hands of the commissioner's office, and it makes the foundations of the rules, why the rules are where they are, what's the reason for this, and obviously we need a greater interpretation of this. We need to have a rule, not a standard. We need to remove the subjectivity from the umpires. And I don't blame the umpires, because the umpires are sitting there doing something that all of a sudden the focus is on them. They're doing this field test. And I think the reason that many, many umpires have stayed away from this is because when you hear the basis for the decision making, which is one inning is tacky and the next inning is tacky, but knowing that he cleaned his hands, which would logically remove the subject of tackiness, and yet he reapplies it, in front of the people that what he's using is league sanctioned. I don't know. And what I'm most upset about is that who they're doing this to. This is Max Scherzer. This is a man who's the world champion, is a 3-time Cy Young Award winner. He is a person that does what you should do as a Major League Baseball player. He is that kind of person. The amount of information that he shares with my young clients and what he does to teach how to be a major leaguer and how to live his life on and off the field, that is what is most disturbing to me.
Hey, Scott, so for Max, this is also a personal attack of his character. This is likely going to cost him money. And he spoke very heated right after the game yesterday. He also, of course, spoke to us a few days ago and called out this very issue and said this is going to be a problem. But then you have Phil Cuzzi afterward, like you mentioned earlier, saying this is the stickiest he's felt anyone's hands in 3 seasons, to be the judge of how sticky someone's hands are. So, I mean, technically it's slander. How does Max feel about that afterward? Because Max spoke to the media before Phil Cuzzi addressed the one pool reporter. So how did Max react to somebody calling out his character, costing him money, and basically saying he's a cheater?
Well, umpires' opinions are protected. So when you talk about slander and things of that nature, is that their opinions about what they see or don't see on the field is something that is in the nature of their opinion, and they're allowed to give that. But remember that these umpires, immediately when they're in the room, you're going to find out that they received phone calls, they received statements, they received advice on exactly what to say to the media and when. And obviously, when you have a subjective rule, you want to provide evidence in your report that lends to objective evidence that is going to make sure that under their existing rules, they have the needed testimony to provide evidence to support the claims that will be coming knowing that the player is saying it's rosin, and then they're going to use the rule to say, no, you used too much rosin because we told you, we warned you, and told you it was too sticky. And then the fact that's interesting, though, is that Max cleansed his hands in front of an MLB official, which was probably unknown to them, and in doing so, reapplied the rosin in front of them, and then went out. And so that makes their testimony, how do I put it, interesting.
When's the testimony? When does this get to be solved? Because maybe this is a chance for, your party and the MLBPA and everyone to present a case and say, actually, this isn't an automatic suspension. This needs to be fixed.
Well, that would be up to the MLBPA and their lawyers that are, representing Max in the hearing, and MLB. We have not heard anything from MLB yet. So
that means it's not happening quick. It's not going to be quick.
Well, I
The
think
process? No.
Well, no, because Scott, because it's an automatic 10 games. Does that 10 games start today for the Mets' next game, or did it wait till the appeal? Do you see? Because if it's automatic 10 games, which I think is wrong, then would Max be suspended for the next 10 games, or is there until the appeal?
Well, obviously, Max will file an appeal to this. And again, when we get down to the rules that are applicable, you understand the issue here. The issue is this is completely a subjective judgment. And to suggest that this is not an independent arbitrator, it's a employee of the commissioner's office that will adjudicate this, and they will look at the rule and say that these umpires have every right to make subjective judgments and say, and the fact that the player doesn't have notice. Did the umpires come out and say to Max, hey, we warned you? And Max goes, look, I put this in front of your officials. I clean my hands. I test them there. And they could have said, no, it's still too tacky. Go wash off again. They didn't do that. Because they're going to say that they warned him before. Because now, if it's a subjective standard, then, and you want the player to play and you want the rules observed, you're going to have to say, no, I understand you're just putting the rosin and the sweat on. I get that. I'm not worried about what you're doing. I'm just telling you for our purposes, it's too tacky. So go back in and wash it off again and make it less tacky. They didn't do that. They threw him out. And the reason is that they're going to say they warned him the first time. And so the point of this is that whether or not the umpires knew the process that was going on in the dugout, I don't know. But to suggest that a man cleans his hands with alcohol in front of an MLB official and applies only rosin in front of it, to suggest that their testimony is after doing that it is more tacky than it was the prior inning. I suggest to you that any player who uses rosin, any player who applies it, is now subject to having absolute no notice that he can be suspended from Major League Baseball. Because how do you know? You don't know. And it's clearly in the purview of the umpire to make that judgment. And you're walking out there with the uncertainty that if you do use any form of rosin, that they would have this potential to suspend you.
Yeah, and Max called it out the other day. It was like, first off, these checks need to happen behind the scenes. It's weird. It's gotten so weird and awkward. It's like there's hand touching from umps. We're discussing and debating how much someone's washing their hands. It feels like kindergarten. It's very strange. So, Scott, we only have a few minutes left with you. There was two other things I wanted to ask you about. One was the commissioner came out on Tuesday and said a reform that has been of interest to ownership for a number of years is a limitation of contract length, and then went on and on about how they need to pass the money on to yesterday's stars. I'm paraphrasing a little bit at that point, but the quotes are too long. And then, of course, MLBPA Executive Director Tony Clark responded that it was basically an assault on guaranteed contracts. I have a feeling I know where you stand on this, but what were your reactions when you heard about that?
Well, the saber rattling about free agent rights, arbitration rights is always going to be a constant from the commissioner's office. And look, when you've got a luxury tax restraint that we have in Major League Baseball, you don't have to worry about the length of contracts. And the reason you don't have to worry about them is because that element is something that creates the greatest burden and restraint on the relationship between revenues earned from Major League Baseball and what percentage of revenues the players receive. And contract length, I don't think the commissioner is at all concerned with, because the reality of it is he knows that the clarity and point of light in this process is that, do I have the buzzer? Do I have the thing that restrains the true value of players? And in the current contract form, they have that with the luxury tax penalties, rules, and I think Tony is exactly right that what is going on in Major League Baseball right now is a great success, increased franchise values, uh, revenues that are truthfully in the $14 billion area. The game is an amazing success with gaming, with streaming, with all the things ahead. To suggest that there's alterations required that would limit the potentials of players, star players, to receive revenues, I find that merely to be that there is always a need and a want to look to other leagues and say, why don't we have that? And I think the difference, that's, we're going to always hear that with Major League Baseball versus other leagues. And I think the point of light is that the game is very, very successful under the current rights structure of having free agency and having arbitration for players. And the amount of control that the owners have over that, I think, is something where they get to reserve the best players in the game for 6 years. 6 years they get to hold on to those great players. And for 3 of those years, pay them the minimum salary. What a great system for having the stars of our game under control.
Scott, since we're talking contracts, there might be a new player for you to call and investigate or call and negotiate with, and that would be Las Vegas Athletics. I don't think you've sent a lot of your big names to Oakland lately, but when they move to Vegas, and it looks like it's going to happen, are you going to be on the phone with Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics saying, "Hey, look, I've got Manny Machado. He's got an opt out here in 27. What do you think? 300 million more? 500 million?"
Well, AJ, I'm always on the phone with Billy Beane. I told him, I said, we may not do much, but I brought Mount Fuji to you. So there you go.
Okay. Okay, so what do you think about them moving? It's about time, right? They can't sustain.
You know, from a TV rights standpoint, the Bay Area is one of our most prominent rights markets, and you're talking 12, 13 million people. To suggest that a team's going to leave a market that is like Chicago and New York to go to Vegas, which I think is certainly a valued potential for a major league franchise. But I just think there's a lot of things that can be done in the Bay Area by Major League Baseball to make that a very, very viable market and make it a very viable television market, as we've done with, the New York and Chicago markets. So, but sometimes relationships with the city fathers and things like that are reach a point where the leverage you're going to use is an exterior city.
Is he for? So you're for expansion over relocation?
Well, I believe that expansion is something that I do believe we have franchises that do need to be relocated. The Bay Area is not one of those areas that I would think that is not viable to raise a very successful major league team if it's done correctly. And again, in fairness to ownership, with the relationship with cities and MLBs approving them to move to San Jose versus Oakland, all those things are inherent in the decision of utilizing the Bay Area. But I do believe that we have a couple great expansion cities, and I do believe we have a couple franchises that would really benefit from moving to markets where their business and valuations would substantially increase.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Important to have you on today, of course, given all of the news, especially to get to the Max stuff. And, we look forward to having you when these kind of topics pop up. Always welcome. So good luck, fight the good fight, and hopefully we see Max on the field without all the BS suspension stuff because the league can't even figure out the rules.
Great. I'm going to go try to hit the gym, guys. I had to catch up before the next time I come on. All right.
Appreciate you, Scott. Thank you so
Scott.
much.